Well, hello everybody. Today I have John Adedoyin. Now, John is a practitioner, an expert in customer experience, who can give his insights from all the many engagements we've had with big banking clients, financial services, and beyond, on what actually happens in customer experience. So we've had a number of conversations about some of the theory, but now getting down to grassroots. Now, I've worked with John on a number of projects, thinking in particular about a large-scale pharmaceutical company that we worked with, John, and really interested in your insights into what's happening today. But before we get there, if you'd just like to give a little bit of intro to yourself and your areas of expertise. Thank you, John.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Stephen. As Stephen said, my name is John Adedoyin, and I have spent many years in consulting, banking, and retail, and I've spent quite a fair bit of time trying to implement the customer orientation with various clients. Now, I've been in this game long enough, even before the word customer experience was common parlance. But now, stepping back and looking over the past, say, 10, 15 years, I just wanted to think about what just got a couple of takeaways that always spring to mind when I'm confronted with a customer experience issue or a client. I think I'd like to just continue along that vein.
Yeah, fantastic. Go for it.
Okay. I mean, what I suppose, and Stephen, feel free to interject with supplementaries as you wish. I want to talk about customer experience, and I suppose how we as businesses evaluate it. So on a basic level, obviously what you want to find out if you are embarking on a customer experience endeavor is to understand the strength of your current customer experience and how we get our arms around it, and as businesses, what do we do to invest in them? Now, my view, a viewpoint which has kind of come to mind over the recent months, is that a lot of energy is spent in justifying and validating the various quantification tools, famously and most conspicuously, say, Net Promoter, for example.
Yes.
And this is understandable. But ultimately, if we think about the objective is for mass qualitative experience quantified, we need to exercise caution in trusting in these metrics. And those are for two reasons. The first one is that by their very nature and by what you're trying to do, averages and aggregation tend to obscure insight, and that's the first thing. And secondly, it can make you lose sight of the objectives. So you spend your whole time in measuring, you kind of lose sight of what you're trying to achieve. And I suppose if I had to say an analogy and give the flippancy, it's like trying to quantify the funniness of a joke. I mean, it's kind of what's the point? So my perspective is, as customer experience professionals, we need to be very careful in what we're trying to achieve. And corporations, and I think you may be familiar with this, tend to have customer experience where it almost becomes almost like a displacement activity. You spend so much time evaluating what you do that the game passes you by.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of my take. The chances are that you probably have a customer experience that appeals to a certain number of your customers, or else you wouldn't be in business in the first place. But secondly, on what dimension do you want to improve and invest in those?
Yes.
So if you think typically, the assessment dimensions, and there are many tools for doing this. The familiar dimensions are things like process, systems, culture and leadership, people, etc., marketing and brand. And you can assess your customers' perception of those on an ongoing basis in terms of what you're doing at the moment and what you plan to do. And that's all very fine, and it's the correct thing, but I would say do it with a light touch. Do not be overburdened by too much numerical quantitative
Yes.
Issues.
Yep.
Because what you find is that you probably have at least the bare bones of at least a decent, acceptable customer experience already.
Mm-hmm.
And it may be a case of reinforcing what you've already done as opposed to doing something totally new.
Okay. I mean, where is the most of the effort is put into measurement rather than doing? Is that essentially what you're saying, John?
Yes, I am saying that. I think it's very easy to be seduced by measurement, and I think it's to do with customer experience as a discipline. It's a relatively new discipline compared to, say, accounting or economics or another dismal science in terms of understanding a business. So we spend the discipline a lot of time putting energy in getting the credibility of the discipline as opposed to the outputs and outcomes it can achieve.
Now, you work a lot with... Sorry, John.
So carry on.
I was going to say, you work a lot with the banking sector, and that's quite an original thing to say, because I think banking focus on numbers. They must be quite obsessed with, say, for instance, moving the metric, are they not?
Well, yes, but the thing about banking, and it seems almost counterintuitive, is that the most successful banks understand the emotions behind what are seemingly commoditized products.
Yes.
Now, I'll give you an example. Barclaycard. Now, on any objective level, you would not necessarily have a Barclaycard, simply because they don't. For a start, they're hard to get hold of because they have quite tough scoring, credit scoring.
Yes.
And secondly, they don't have a very generous API.
Mm.
But why they're successful is they tag onto the emotions related to financial transactions. Now, so if you, an example, we just look at their advertising and their marketing. If you go back in the day, it had, I think they had some celebrity going around as a James Bond type figure.
Yes.
And that was to emphasize the thing is, I can use it anywhere. Confidence you can use anywhere. Ubiquity.
Yes.
Then we moved on to, we had Jennifer Saunders advertising, sitting by a computer screen with her credit card, and that was to advertise and promote the idea of security, i.e. your transactions are safe. Then a few years ago, they had a concept called Glide, which was to promote the fact that things are effortless and, if you talk about functionality, contactless.
Yes.
And then now, most recently, they have the advertising around ubiquity, but being able to transact wherever. So you have the character of the harassed single dad,
yes,
doing all sorts of things, juggling things. So that's where it's the emotional aspect. They don't focus on the API. They focus on what they can do for you, and they focus on the emotions that accrue to financial transactions.
And have you seen
carrying them out?
And have you seen the most successful companies in CX, whether it's within financial services or other industries, really trying to tease out going beyond the functional into more emotional value? Is that really where you see the success factor in customer experience?
That's one of the success factors, absolutely. And if you offer right, and if you think about your customer experience, you can actually have things, and you can actually have outcomes that are counterintuitive when looking back at them. So I'll give you two examples. One is very straightforward, and this is not counterintuitive. This is actually direct.
Yes.
Morrison's as a supermarket, they have a famously and easily recognizable northern heritage. But they have a concept called Market Street, where they want to replicate going down your local high street with things like the butcher, the baker, the fishmonger, the fruitier, the grocer. They want to replicate those. They put a lot of effort in replicating that. And they start from that principle based on the fact that people love that familiarity. It goes to all sorts of things, such as, are things, if you think of bakery, are goods baked in store? Are they baked off the side? They want to have this concept. Fishmonger, is he an expert? The meat, even though it's packaged, is cut up in a cold store on site.
Yes.
So they think through these things, and I have literally a shudder when I recall doing some work with them, because I watched the butchers cutting up meat at 5:30 in the morning, and that's what they did. They replicated it. So it had a rigor in terms of what they were trying to do. Now, how does that translate into operationally?
Mm-hmm.
It means you need to be geared up for that. But the problem is, and the problems they had, and you can see how this translates into return on investment, is that when they took over the Safeway stores, they had a lower store footprint. And they had a decision: do we try and replicate all these things in a small space, or do we not have it as a concept, or do we only have certain bits of it? And that's where some of their financial wobbles recently came from. They've now cleared through that, but it was all about integration of square footage into the overall estate.
Okay.
So what you have there is a principle that seeps through in terms of the people they hire, what they do in store and the theatre of it, the operations and the offering. It's very consistent, and that is the customer experience.
And in taking that holistic concept where it's about the front of stage, back of stage, it's about the performance as well. What are you going to perform? When you deal with clients, how do you break that down? How do you get them to, I suppose, A, believe in it, because it's quite a lot of effort, and B, execute it? What's your experience been in that sense?
I think it's typically what you find is they have a customer experience, but perhaps they haven't necessarily thought it through as much as they should have. So it's there.
Yes. Or
with a changing marketplace dynamic in terms of product offering, they haven't changed that either. So if you're going back to the early days of being able to buy a laptop off the page, you have companies like Dell, and they believe that the customer is so. If you're buying something like that, a product like that, what you want is a level of customization, and that's great. And they thought, right, what the customer wants is customization. However, it was the most superficial of customizations. It was basically, what color do you want your laptop to be? And you can have and famously, and it's been in the press recently, the sort of feminization of products. So I have a pink laptop, for example.
Yeah.
Whereas Apple sort of picked up on that, but their customization is something that's actually relevant to the customer, relevant to their usage, and emotionally relevant, as opposed to superficial. So it's a case of that companies understand it but don't execute it. Yeah. Now, a couple of minutes ago, on my ramble, I talked about counterintuitive customer experiences. Now, if you think of Louis Vuitton, luxury brand goods, how they manage their stores, the theatre of the stores, is to manufacture literally this seeming exclusivity. So they will do things like literally have bouncers on the door limiting how many people to go into the store. Now that's against most people's expectations, i.e., I want to go and look at your product and you're denying me access to browse.
Yes.
You're limiting the browsing, which is totally counterintuitive, but it has an emotional resonance in the fact that they think to themselves, we are exclusive. How do we do that operationally? How do we do that outside of the product? How do we almost create a concierge type value system on a whole operation, as opposed to here is a very expensive handbag?
And when you
so it's thought through.
Yes, and this thinking through, taking to an example like a bank, because most people's, I guess, perceptions of bank is they're quite boring, they're out to get us. But you found that thinking has actually been relevant to them, and they recognise it. Is that the case, or are they still very much metric driven as we started?
Absolutely the case.
Yeah.
Absolutely the case. Well, they have it depends on the metrics. If the metrics just a pure return and operations and headcount, i.e., the rather transactional metrics, you're going to unnecessarily penalise yourself. If you think of a wider level of metrics, in fact, or slightly more nuanced level of suite of metrics, you often have better outcomes. I'll give you an example. Whilst at HSBC, I worked on the complaints customer journey, amongst other customer journeys.
Yes.
Now, what they found was they didn't go into a lot of detailed criteria, i.e., they didn't go through the classic culture and leadership process, branding, leadership, etc., but they did recognize they didn't recognize a customer journey. And what they realized was the complaints is we don't want zero complaints simply because we learn from them.
Yes.
So one, so it's a cultural change. And second, we realize that in order to provide a positive customer experience,
yes,
we looked at the training people. That was a thing. So if you think about this as a complaint, and you see this in financial services, if you think of the complaint, you think that actually the speed of resolution is the ultimate top end, the top line metric.
yes.
Actually, that's not true. The real metric is the honesty, integrity, saying what you're going to do metric. Is far more important.
And that's
so
a really.
If I have an issue, assuming it isn't financially sensitive, i.e., I'm being penalised with an interest rate on account of non-performance by the bank, I would rather you said to me, "You're going to call me back at such and such time. Tell me the outcome, and it will be by this time."
Yes.
Not that it has to be done in 24 hours. It's not the timing. It's the integrity and keeping your promise is what customers value.
Because so often there's a conflict. Because dealing with customer care a little bit myself, it's from a different direction. It's about reduce time on calls, get the call over as quickly as possible, reduce OPEX. But what you're saying is that's tantamount to forcing to a very a thin definition of customer experience, when in actual fact you should be focusing more on how people receive the experience, how they feel about the experience, which comes back to the honesty, actually more intangibles actually within the customer care unit. Is that correct?
That's absolutely spot on, Stephen. And I'll give you another example. If you go back to the days of Egg Bank back in the noughties, they set up a contact center, and they had the whole concept of dancing with the customer. Now that sounds a bit hokey, and that's true, but the skill was by the customer service operative figuring out what sort of interaction the customer wants during the call. So if you're someone like me, and possibly yourself, I'm quite brusque. I just want something sorted. Some people want something a bit more digressive and conversational. And the metric of time won't accommodate those two different things, because it will tend towards people like me who are brusque and want things done. I'm very busy. But not every customer is like that. Some people like the conversation, the interaction. So putting a time metric on it, an operational efficiency metric, you will miss that.
Yes. So what is the best metric then? What would you?
Well, the best metric that you wouldn't. I mean, in terms of what you want to measure, I'm not sure if there's one metric. But what you want to measure is the satisfaction of the interaction, and it's both qualitative and quantitative. So it'd be measured, i.e., do I get the outcome? I sort out my problem. That's obviously top line. Is it done in a manner that I find appropriate? A, to the issue, B, to who I am as a person.
Yes.
So I want to get off that call feeling good. I want to be feeling taken care of. And that's not a time metric. You can't necessarily do that. So people will come with a different metric in their own minds as to what a successful outcome is. And that's what often operationally you're not cognizant of that.
And then when you set up the journeys themselves, when you went through that customer journey process, how did you build in this sense of what people want to receive from the experience? Because a lot of journey maps start from, I guess, a basis of process efficiency, or and almost miss out sometimes those more emotional or more sense of type variables. How did you approach that in your journey mapping?
Well, funnily enough, actually, the operation itself helps you figure out the emotion. So what's happening? What's happening to you in any point in time? So if something's unresolved, I am unhappy. What do you put in place to do that? It's almost like a physical process as well. It's like standing in a queue, or going to, or perhaps if you forgive the overlap, queuing up for a bank or whatever it may be. It's all those little things in terms of handoff as well. What do you call what is an appropriate level of handoff, for example? what happens is, so one of the metrics was number of times you had to be passed along. So and it's not just a time thing. I call in and I'm furious.
Yeah.
How do you diffuse that emotion? Well, I'll tell you what makes me really annoyed is if you pass me on to someone and I have to explain all over again in my agitated state.
Yes.
So I am furious. I'm even more furious. I have to explain again. I've built up this emotion to explain the issue and explain why I'm complaining, but then I have to do it all over again.
Yeah.
So in terms of a process, what you do is you train the operative to summarize to the person you're handing off to.
Yes.
So they don't have to explain again. It's little things like that. So it's behavioral.
Yes. So it's not just about.
And also that speaks to the channel as well. Yeah, it's definitely not about the technology. And the funny thing is, here's the validation of that approach. HSBC and First Direct.
Yes.
HSBC owns First Direct. First Direct scores high in by most customer experience metrics, but it doesn't have the best systems.
Yes.
It doesn't have the best technology, but what it does have is two things. One is very well-trained operatives who have a fantastic manner in dealing with customers. But second, and the thing we haven't touched on, it has a customer base that has a certain level of expectation. I.e., I expect telephone banking, therefore I have preconception of what considers a good telephone banking experience or not, because it's through one single channel. And so they're kind of ahead of the curve in terms of personal interaction in that. So you understand the point there in terms of channel.
I guess it links to the brand, as you say, the expectations level.
Absolutely.
John,
absolutely.
Really interesting approach, stories, expertise there. If people want to get in touch with you now, can you just give them how best to connect up with you?
The best way to connect is by my direct personal email. Okay. Can I give that out?
If you wish to.
Okay. Yes.
Or you can go on LinkedIn.
It's john.adedoyin@talk21.com.
Fantastic. Well, I can absolutely recommend John. Fantastic consultant and real expert in this area. So, John, we'll speak a little bit after this finish here. But I really appreciate your time. And thank you very much.
Not at all. Pleasure. Bye.